Lifetime Hearing Services, the premier hearing healthcare facility of the PD, is so very pleased to sponsor this next conversation with Nicole, my good friend. Sit back and enjoy.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Conversations with Nicole. Today, my guest is South Carolina Representative Brandon Guffey of Rock Hill. He was elected to the House this year, but before that, he was a member of York County Council. Now, I had the honor of meeting Brandon when my husband, Watts Huckabee, decided to run for the office that Brandon vacated in order to run for the House. Both of you are winners in your respective offices now, and it really was a pleasure to meet you that day that we had lunch and talked about Watts running for office. And Brandon, I have to say, when I met you, I told my husband at the time, I said, he's a special person. I had no idea at that time all that you had been going through because I was new to the Rock Hill, South Carolina area. But we're here today to talk about legislation that you passed during your freshman year in the House as a result of losing your son, Gavin. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So July 27th of 2022, I lost my son, Gavin, who was 17, to suicide. There was no letter or anything of that nature. The only thing that we knew at the time, he had sent out, I'm going to hold this up. He sent out a text message with this symbol, which is like a heart, to all of his friends and family prior to taking his life. In the weeks following, I found out that he was a victim of a crime called sextortion. I had never heard of it before, but essentially someone, these organizations or groups, they're targeting teenage boys primarily, but they pretend to be a girl of similar age that shares interests. They get them onto these private video chats. They start exchanging videos or photos, and then they record them and start to blackmail the children. In my son's case, they were blackmailing him for money, and they're going to release it to all of his friends. And that is what caused Gavin to take his life.
Yeah.
So after getting elected, I, my number one goal, I wasn't sure if I wanted to continue in politics. My wife said, absolutely not. You're going through with this. You're one of the few people with a voice that can actually make a difference.
Yeah.
So my entire focus has been on, number one, making this a law, which it was not a law in South Carolina. There were only 7 other states at the time that had a law in the books. Number two, raising awareness about the issue. And I've kind of become a spokesperson in regards to sextortion on a national level. It's not something that I want to do, but I'm a big believer in sometimes God gives you a Goliath to bring out the David in you. And I think that is kind of something that's happened. And it helps me in my grieving process as well, because I feel like I'm getting some good out of a horrible situation. So whenever I took office, I pre-filed a bill. I went off of Utah's sextortion law. And whenever I filed it, we had a 15-year mandatory minimum. I wanted it as strict as possible. My ultimate goal was to send the message, if you're going to extort a child, don't let it be in South Carolina or we're going to punish you.
Yes.
And that's what I started off with. As a freshman, it's very rare to get legislation passed in the state of South Carolina. It's rare to even get it to come up in a committee, much less get it passed. But we started off, and we had the 3rd largest freshman class in the history of 125 legislative seasons in South Carolina. And starting week 1, the freshmen gathered around my desk. Everyone that signed on to the bill, I gave this pin to, so we all wore it on our lapel pins, and we would meet every Tuesday in a circle around my desk and discuss strategy on how to move this forward. I'd say we went all the way up to crossover, which is the time period where even if you do pass something, the Senate's not going to pull it up until the following year.
Yeah.
We made it all the way to there without my bill getting a committee hearing. And so in the process, it has to go through a subcommittee, which you have testimony, then it goes through a committee, and then it goes to the House floor. Once it passes the House floor, then it's got to go to the Senate and go to a subcommittee, then the Senate floor. But through this, I just started realizing that it's not moving. So I grabbed the minority leader of the House. I grabbed a few of the Democratic attorneys. I grabbed a few of the Republican attorneys, and our legal staff and the chairs of the committee. And I said, look, ultimately, I think we can all agree we want to protect children.
Yes.
How can we make this move forward? And what do we need to do? And through those discussions, and I let them know, I understand this is personal to me. I'm not taking it personal. I want your honest opinion. Ultimately, this is what we want to do. So how do we make this right? We rewrote the entire bill. So we changed it to whereas every penalty, regardless of level, is a felony. So that gives local law enforcement the ability to extradite, or gives them the incentive to do so. The most important thing that we did was we added an proponent for awareness. So the local school districts, or our education in South Carolina, they will have to inform students, teachers, parents, and the Attorney General's office has to make the general public aware of Gavin's law going forward. And that is going to fight the tremendous battle. We got it through committee after crossover. So I was told, well, you're not going to be able to get it to the Senate. They're not going to go through it. But one of the most important things I would say was on the House floor. Whenever it came to the House floor, I expected, I didn't expect to have anyone really opposing me on it. But the surprising part was whenever I went up there, I had Representative Sessions, Representative Lawson, and Representative Cox. We joke around and call ourselves the porch caucus because we sit on the back porch and think we're solving the world's problems. And I asked them to just come and stand behind me for support. I knew it was going to be tough to talk without crying in front of everyone. And whenever I went up there to speak, 2/3 of the legislators got up out of their desk and come and stood behind me. Standing ovation, passed with no opposition whatsoever. Went to the Senate, and then I was told it's not going to get a Senate hearing, so we're going to have to address this next year. Ended up getting a couple of champions in the Senate that started moving it forward. And then whenever it came to the Senate floor, I think it was Senator Sin made the amendment for our education proponent of it to be annually. So instead of it just being a one-time notification to everyone in the state, now every year it has to be reported, which was huge.
Huge, yeah.
Yes. And then whenever it went to the floor, in South Carolina, we have a rule that you can't name a law after someone because we've had tremendous amounts. I think the last bill that would pass with someone's name on it was called Peanuts Law, about a construction worker that was killed doing DOT work. But people started naming laws after dogs and trying to use that against people's heartstrings. So the Senate passed a rule that they will not take up any bill with a name on it, and they will not pass any bill with a name on it. While that was important to me, it was more important to get the law passed. And whenever I showed up to the Senate on the floor, the day of the floor, Senator Clymer submitted an amendment, and he couldn't read it. So he had another senator actually read it for him up there to name it Gavin's Law. And I thought for sure there's a senator that would object to it. He stood up. I was like, here we go. So he's going to object to it. But instead, he requested the roll of the Senate to be put on that amendment. So every senator's name was put on that amendment, and then it passed unanimously. And at that time, the president of the Senate, which I've never seen happen, told everyone to stand at ease, and every senator, including the president, come down, shook my hand, gave me a hug, offered words of encouragement. So there's been a lot of big moments throughout this. Up until the point.
What did that mean to you, though, when all of those big moments kept happening that are so rare in politics? That's moving. I mean, I am emotional listening to you tell the story. I can't imagine what it was like for you being there.
It's huge. Don't get me wrong. I can be a bit of a bull in a china shop at times. So the hard part was me trying to cool my temper. I think one of the first meetings I had with the governor, congratulate me on how fast things were moving. And I said, I don't really think it's moving that fast. And he said, it's really moving fast to be a freshman. And I said, well, we passed an economic development deal in 10 days. And he said, well, it had a deadline on it. And I said, well, what's the deadline on saving children? So I think laws need to be able to move quicker whenever something like this is involved. Now, the one thing that a lot of the attorneys pointed out, and I thought was a great point, just as my son was a kid that made the mistake of sharing photos to begin with, I don't want someone else's kid that threatens, if you break up with me, I'm going to share this photo, for them looking at getting 20 years in prison. So whenever it comes to minors, we're leaving the decision up to family court to handle that. And that was something I didn't think about before, but having those open conversations with all different sectors makes a difference.
We'll talk about the difference between what happened to Gavin and a boyfriend-girlfriend breakup. That's totally different. Explain the situation so people understand that a little better.
So with what happened to Gavin, I'm on my phone, so I can't pull up the statistics, but I believe it was one out of six kids under the age of 18 have admitted to sharing an intimate photo. More than half of them see no problem with it because of the disappearing apps. They grow up in this age of sharing intimate photos and having online relationships.
Sure.
In Gavin's case, he was a sexually active teenager. I would constantly tell him, I'm not here to make decisions for you. You're almost old enough to fight for this country. I'm here to guide you in the decisions that you make. So we had a very open relationship. We talked to one another about many different things. Sometimes things that parents wouldn't talk, but I believe that fathers and sons, especially, or mothers and daughters, should have those open conversations. I'm not saying that you got to be their friend, but whenever they're at that age, they need someone more of guidance instead of preaching to them at that point. Wow. What happened to Gavin was he was literally targeted, which is what's happening to all of these teens that are dying across the country. I would say just in my area, and your listeners might not be aware of the area, but I represent 42,000 people in the state of South Carolina. I've had over 30 families contact me just in the Rock Hill area since everything's happened to Gavin. So in under a year, over 30 families that this is currently happening to or has happened to. But I get, at minimum, a good day, I get one phone call. On average, I get 2 to 3 a day from across the country from parents that are dealing with this. Or kids. I have a huge following on social media with teenagers. And I have a lot of teenagers that reach out to me, and I don't report it to their parents. I encourage them to do so and try to give them the advice on how to handle this situation.
Dr. Leslie Kirby, that's me, and Nicole go way back over 30 years. I was just beginning my career as an audiologist, and Nicole was a new news reporter way before she became a beloved news anchor. She has always professionally supported my hearing healthcare practice, and I am so very excited to be her first ever Conversations with Nicole sponsor. You know, that's what we should all do, support one another, and that's just what my Lifetime Hearing team does with all of our patients. We make lives better and easier with communication so that people can love life, enjoy the grandchildren, enjoy church, enjoy TV, and hear the I love yous that mean so much. Offering the best in Belltone hearing aid technology, as well as providing cochlear implant solutions, we have become known as the PD's premier hearing healthcare facility, with having evaluated more than 52,000 ears to date. With national award-winning services, call us for your on-time appointment.
Difference between a boyfriend-girlfriend scenario and Gavin is that Gavin was targeted. Right. This is not a real person, right. Not someone that you've met in person. I tell teens, you can't tell teens don't share images. And I equate it to the 80s whenever everyone preached abstinence. And then some girl gets pregnant and people want to point at her and call her a whore or Jezebel or whatever it is. bottom line is all the teens were having sex, and then you want to vilify one person.
Right.
With this, all these teens are sharing images and videos, and the kids that are dying are the ones that people want to point out that are the problem, as if it's not happening, but it is happening. I can assure you, in the majority of homes across the country and across the state. So they essentially get catfished into thinking that they're talking to someone. So I tell the kids, if you are going to send a picture, do not put your face in it or any identifying features. With AI, these sextortionists are starting to get to the point to where they just Photoshop your face onto anotother body.
Isn't
and
that
threaten.
crazy? Oh,
You don't even have to share the image. They just make it look like it's you and threaten to send it out to everyone. So I tell the kids,
encourage the kids or anyone, just don't share the photos. But we are in a world where they end up doing that. And we have
right,
to say, okay, you may have done that, but here's how you've got to protect yourself and not get caught up by these
yeah,
scammers. And when you do that, nothing is worth your life. We can work through this. And
right,
that was the disconnect for Gavin. He was worried he couldn't get through it.
yes. And I think with Gavin, it was a lot of, at first I wanted to say it was because I was in politics. One of the images that the extortionists used was a Hunter Biden headline, and they put Gavin's picture on it, and they put my name on it with Gavin's name. And I think, I do think that played a part in it. But what I'm seeing with these kids across the country is that is not the case. Their parents are not political figures. And so they weren't able to use that against them. It is ultimately what it is shame. The kids are trying to hide shame. And what we have forgotten in this country is grace. Us as adults we're too busy trying to act perfect. We're trying to add all of these filters. We're trying to, for a lack of a better term, pretend that our stuff doesn't stink. And bottom line is I push the fact, and I say, not only have I messed up, I will continue to mess up. It took me 20 years to become a Christian because I thought everyone was either perfect or a hypocrite. And it wasn't until I realized that we're all imperfect that I was able to accept Christ. And I think that is through grace, and regardless of your religion or not, we need to start teaching that to our young kids. We are forgetting that very important factor. And whenever we're telling kids, whatever you do online is going to stay with you forever, we're not telling them that, hey, everybody's got crap online. Is
And you know what,
yours harder to overcome?
One mistake should not define us. Because we all make mistakes, and for Christians, we all fall short of the glory of the Lord, and that's why we have God's grace. And we should not be defined by one mistake or even two mistakes. If we keep trying, then that's the beauty of it. As a society, we should not hold one person to the one mistake they made,
Right.
And I'm sure that's what the children felt, that get involved in this. What Gavin partly felt.
Yeah. And the mistakes are what make us. They're not what define
our experiences.
us. Yeah. I've always loved good memories are always made by bad decisions. Yeah. So as you get old, right. Just about every one of my bad decisions have become good memories. And they were all things that I felt like I couldn't overcome at the time.
Right. And you did. And unfortunately for Gavin, it was a situation where someone just kept coming at him. And that's why this law is so important, to track these monsters down, because even after Gavin's death, they pursued your family.
Yeah. And I hold social media responsible for this. Meta was the company that contacted Gavin. That was one profile, and it was a name, and then it was number 28. That was the profile that was extorting Gavin. Once the warrant and everything was filed for that, or requesting the information, that name, number 30, began to extort my 14-year-old cousin, tried to extort my 16-year-old son, which luckily law enforcement intervened with that, and then continued to try to extort me. And I ignored the messages. Gavin took his life on July 27th, 22. Gavin's 18th birthday would have been on August the 20th. So my wife and I went out of town to try and get away from everything. And I was sitting on the porch late one evening, and I got a message from that name 30 that said, "Did I tell you your son begged for his life?" And at that point, with a laughing face emoji at that.
Oh my
And at
God.
that point, I lost my cool and started going back and forth with them. But needless to say, they were trying to extort me, trying to say they were hired by a political opponent, and just trying to say anything and everything. They tried to show me pictures of my house,
God.
to which I replied, please come by. I would love to have a chat with you. And,
They probably weren't even in this country, though. That's the thing.
No. Now, I do believe that there will be a couple of arrests within the United States that's associated with Gavin, along with some possibly internationally. Because as I said, these are organized crimes. These are not single individual. It goes all the way back to money laundering, the transfer of digital currency, the VPNs, everything. Our technology is allowing this stuff to happen. That is the scariest part. Now, in addition to Gavin's law, one of the things that I did, I started to speak to women throughout the state of South Carolina that would call me, that were stuck. South Carolina is one of 2 states that does not have a revenge porn law in place. It has not been taken up. And as I started to speak to them, they were caught up in relationships to whereas they may have made a recording or took photos with their partner, and then their partner threatened to release them if they leave them. That now in South Carolina, thanks to Gavin's law, will be considered sextortion. I don't need a revenge porn. So we will process or charge them under the sextortion law now, because that is considered a threat to share the images, and that is considered blackmail.
Yeah.
So it will fall under that law now.
And for the conviction of these folks, what tell me the parameters of what they could get if convicted.
Okay, so if it is an adult, 2 adults, the victim's an adult, the perpetrator's an adult, you're looking at up to 5 years for a first offense, up to 10 for a second, and up to 20 for a third, all of which are felonies. If you are targeting a child or an at-risk adult, it is up to 20 years. If death or great bodily harm occurs to the victim due to this, it is also an additional up to 20 years. All of these are stackable.
Okay.
So that is important.
Yes.
It is one of the strictest laws that we have. And it is definitely sending the message. Now, we left it as up to, that way we're allowing the judges the discretion. And if it is 2 minors, then it goes to family court.
Right. So talk about where you are now. The law has passed.
Yes.
You have to feel some sort of little bit of peace with it, to know that your son's passing was not in vain, and that from his death you can do some good. And you have to feel a community came together for you and for the people of this state who would be in need of this law when all of your lawmakers voted yes for this. Talk about how you feel about all of that.
Ooh. Through therapy, I've not only had to go through therapy, but EMDR therapy for PTSD. One thing that I think I prepared myself for was how I would feel if it did not pass.
Okay.
The one thing I did not prepare myself for was how I would feel if it did pass. I'm struggling a little bit with that, honestly, because I feel like it should be a relief, but instead I feel like it's just one step. I feel like it's just taking off from the starting line. I know that even with raising awareness, and for every kid or parent that calls me and tells me that they're thankful that their kid came to them and they were able to avoid, or their kid was suicidal, all of that feels good, but all of that feels expected.
Yeah.
It's the fight to keep from having that phone call or seeing that headline that we lost another kid to this, or that some criminal has gotten away with this. And until I can put a stop to that, I mean, that is, even if I put a stop to all sextortion, my focus is still on teenage mental health, not just the sextortion, not just the cyber crimes. There's so much we need to address. I filed a bill to require any adult websites to require verification of age, which adult websites will not do. So what they will do is they will just say, we're not going to be shown in South Carolina, which is what happened in Utah. I'm perfectly fine with that. But if you're an adult and you want to go and buy an adult magazine, you have to show verification of age. So why don't we require that online?
Makes sense.
So I believe that's a step. I believe mental health. I found out that there's only 28 beds in the state of South Carolina for youth, and that is disheartening. So that's going to be my focus going into 2023 or 2024, sorry. And then with the nonprofit, I want to travel around to all the states, and I want to see this legislation within all the states, even if it's nothing more than the awareness piece.
Yeah.
I think that is what is most important.
This segment of Conversations by Nicole is sponsored by Lifetime Hearing Services with 3 locations in Florence, Hartsville, and Camden. Visit us on Facebook and at lifetimehearingservices.com. Until next time, be well, stay grateful, and be blessed.